big, juicy T-bone steak. I think my mouth watered when I said that. Magandang umaga mga kabano. Ako po si Chris Urbano, and today I want to share with you my top 5 list of Filipino beef dishes. For me, what's really important when considering my favorite Filipino foods is one, what's the culinary value of this dish? How technically excellent is it? How interesting is it from a culinary perspective? Second is how unique, authentic, or yung gano ka pagka-Filipino is that recipe. And then the third thing is, of course, gano kasarap, like how tasty is this dish for me. Beef in the Philippines, it's not as popular meat to consume every day as say pork or fish or chicken, but it is a local beef industry. If you go down to Tagaytay or to Laguna, you're gonna see a lot of local cattle here in the Philippines. And one of my favorite experiences there is going to the mahogany market in Tagaytay, where they've got a big beef market, and above the market you can get the best bulalo in the Philippines. First one is actually going to be Bistek Tagalog. It's an interesting one because the history of it, it's a Spanish and then subsequently Mexican influenced dish. Very thinly sliced beef. The Mexicans often use that as a filling for, tacos. Now in the Philippines, they've taken that, basic idea of the tenderized thin beef strips, and the cut of meat you would usually see used would be maybe sirloin, tenderloin, rump that's been thinly sliced. What the Filipino has done is basically add to this calamansi for sourness and soy sauce for saltiness. So it's taken this dish that was fairly plain when cooked in Spain or in Mexico, and has taken it to an entirely new level of flavor. It's really important to marinate the bistek for as long as you can, at least 3 hours, but ideally overnight. The calamansi juice is going to go to work on tenderizing the beef, making it more palatable even if you're using a tougher local beef. Now when I cook this myself, I like to, so there's a bit of controversy over what to do with the onions. Some people would love to have the big white circular onion rings sitting on top of the dish. When I make this dish, what I tend to do is I'll put some onions in at the start of cooking the bistek, so those get really cooked through and caramelized, and I like that little bit of sweetness you get from the caramelized onions. And then right at the end, I'll just throw in a few more rings of onion, but I definitely am gonna let that cook for like at least 1 minute just to take a bit of the edge off, but they're still very much like whole round, just lightly covered in the marinade. But that's how I personally like to enjoy bistek, and that's my number 5 on the list. Okay, number 4 on my list is Picadillo. So why does this one make the list? I mean, this is a super interesting dish with really interesting culinary origins that go back to Spanish, Mexican cooking cuisines in Central America and that Caribbean style of cooking. Now, Picadillo in essence is, a ground beef dish to which we're adding a variety of, flavoring vegetables. In Central America or the Caribbean, they would use raisins or capers to flavor this dish with those intense hits of sweet and saltiness. Here in the Philippines, it's actually quite a different preparation. Where, sure, we use things like peas and carrots to get those little hints of sweetness through the dish. But, Filipinos have added quail eggs to the picadillo, and without having access to say, raisins, we often will use banana chips, which go into picadillo, and that gives this, not only sweetness to the dish, but also this really nice textural crunch when you're eating it. For that reason, I find it incredibly fascinating to cook and eat and enjoy picadillo. Super sarap. So, number 3 on my list is Salpicao. Now this is another one which has, interesting Western European influences, but has very much been adapted for Southeast Asian cooking styles and flavors. And I really find it interesting the way this one is consumed as well. Most Filipino food is typically a main course, like an ulam. Salpicao falls in the category of pulutan, or something that you pick up and eat. That's a technical term. And we would normally have this on a Friday night, with a few beers or a few glasses of wine in my case. Now when you're cooking this one, you want to make sure that you use, because you're actually normally serving it a little bit medium rare to rare, you are lightly cooking the beef. So it's also quite different to most Filipino dishes where the beef is slow cooked or stewed for a long period. So you need to use a better cut. Typically tenderloin or sirloin would be used. So super, super delicious. If you haven't already tried that one at home, I think there's a recipe somewhere on the blog you can check out. And let's get on to number 2. So number 2 is Nilagang Baka. Nilagang Baka literally means boiled beef soup, right? So this is a beef soup that is obtained by a long boiling of beef, typically cuts that have bones in them, which yield a really, really powerful tasting beef stock. So there's a number of dishes that are similar to Nilagang Baka in the Philippines. There is a dish called bulalo, which is famous in Tagaytay, Lake Tal outside of Manila. The key difference there is that will use the cross-cut beef shank, which still has the bone marrow inside, and the consuming of the beef marrow with the beef and that bone, the very flavoursome bone, is something that goes down very, very nicely in the cooler climate or when it's raining up in Tagaytay. They'll typically use corn, for example, as a little bit of a vegetable sweetener, like a piece of sweet corn in bulalo, whereas classic Nilagang Baka would probably use actually bananas to flavour the soup. Now, this is what I find really interesting about it is, what other country on earth has this kind of beef and banana in a soup combination? Bananas, which in Australia is almost exclusively a breakfast food, or maybe a banana split for dessert, and going, yep, we can work with that, we can do that with beef. And it doesn't stop there, because of course when Filipinos serve Nilagang Baka, it's always will come out with patis and calamansi. Leave a comment below how you do your Nilagang Baka below, or your beef nilaga below. Are we ready for number 1? So here we are, number 1 on my list of favorite Filipino beef dishes. It's of course beef caldereta. This is the iconic Filipino beef dish. So from a culinary value standpoint, this is again a dish that has Western European origins. It's come to the Philippines, it's been localized, it's been enhanced. It's become more interesting a dish than it was a beef tomato-based stew cooked in Europe. Well, the first thing I've got to tell you is you need to cook this dish right. And when you do that, and you do a long, slow cook of the caldereta, it immediately becomes, a much more interesting dish. The next thing that's really interesting about this is if you cook it again from scratch, you really should have a few dill pickles in there, like real, European style dill pickles, which are that salty sour. In the Philippines, the use of the local Philippine tomatoes and that little bit of dill pickles, you just get a sourness, which is really symbolic of, this Filipino balance between the salt, the sweetness, the bitter, the savoriness, and the sourness. And what a lot of people don't know is, 200 years ago, if you were cooking this, you would probably introduce a little bit of dairy to actually make that caldereta a little richer. So you can put just a tablespoon or so of sour cream or yogurt into this, and that will just really thicken and richen the caldereta sauce again. Okay, so that was my top 5 Filipino beef dishes. What did you think? Do you agree or do you disagree? Special announcement, I have my first cookbook coming out at the end of the year, and if you'd like to find out a bit more about that, now I'm going to put my email and contact details below, and I'd love for you guys to get a copy. Remember, you can subscribe to the channel anytime if you want to learn more about Filipino food, cooking, and have fun with me from right here in the Philippines. Alright, thanks guys, we'll see you next time. Keep watching, bye bye.